This is the Volkswagen T-Cross. It's the smallest and the cheapest SUV that VW makes, and it's just had some pretty significant updates. In this review, I'll tell you what's changed out here, in here, under here, and of course, if all of those changes add up to make the T-Cross a better buy than it's ever been. But first, let's talk about where the T-Cross fits into VW's own lineup, because if you've been thinking about buying a small SUV made by Volkswagen, then you may have found yourself slightly confused. And that's understandable because there isn't just one or two models to choose from. There are three different models and they're all, roughly speaking, about the same size. And if you spec them up with the same engines and the same level of equipment, there isn't a huge amount in it for price either. The T-Cross is the shortest though, so it's about 11 centimeters shorter than the T-Roc and about 14 centimeters shorter than the Taygo. And if you're thinking all three of those cars are probably essentially the same underneath, they just look a bit different, well, that is indeed the case with the T-Cross and the Taygo. The real difference is that the Taygo has a slightly lower roofline and a more coupe-esque profile, but both cars sit on the same underpinnings as the Volkswagen Polo. The T-Roc though, that actually sits on the same underpinnings as larger cars like the VW Golf and the Audi A3. Anyway, later on we'll be talking a little bit more about which of those models might suit you best. But for the time being, let's focus on the T-Cross and what's changed out here. So, all models now get LED headlights and LED daytime running lights as standard. And if you go for a style version, which is what this car is, or an R-Line, then you'll get this LED light detailing down here as well, along with this slightly redesigned front bumper. There are also three new colours. This isn't one of them, this is called Smoky Grey Metallic, but you can now have Grape Yellow, Clear Blue Metallic, that's a sort of sky blue, and there's King's Red Metallic as well. That last colour is actually a premium option, so it adds £860 to the price, rather than the £675 you'll pay for the other metallic finishes. When it comes to changes at the back here, not a huge amount. We've got a slightly redesigned rear bumper down here with these more vertical reflector lenses, and although you might not necessarily be able to tell, these taillights now have LED bulbs in them too. Now, under here, the cheapest engine is still a 1 litre turbocharged petrol with 94 brake horsepower, and that comes with a 5-speed manual gearbox as standard. If you spend an extra £845, then you can upgrade to a more powerful version of the same basic 1 litre engine, and that has 114 brake horsepower and comes with a 6-speed manual gearbox. The third and final option is this 1.5 litre engine. That comes with the 7-speed automatic gearbox as standard, and it's a very nice engine, as we'll come on to explain later on. The problem is, it's quite expensive. That's partly because it's only available with the top two trim levels, Style and R-Design. So if you want the 1.5 TSI 150 in your T-Cross, you'll be spending at least £30,740, and that is quite a lot of money. So not huge changes so far, but there is a lot more to talk about in here. And let's start with the biggest improvement, which is to interior quality. So when the T-Cross was first launched back in 2019, we were pretty critical of its interior because you had lots of hard and just not very nice plastics, and it didn't feel like a particularly upmarket car to sit in. But VW has obviously listened to the criticism, probably more from owners and potential owners than us, to be honest. But you've now got soft touch material up on top of the dashboard here and on the lower half as well. And on this style version, there is this leather panel that's stitched onto the face of the dashboard here. So again, it lifts things, and that actually changes colour depending on the interior colour scheme you go for. Fairly small changes, yes, but they do make the T-Cross just a nicer place to sit in and feel a bit more upmarket inside. So that is a good thing. Another change is the infotainment system. So all versions now come with an 8-inch touchscreen that you see here. And it's fairly high up on the dashboard, so it's easy to see. You don't have to look down here when you're driving. And it's relatively quick to respond. It also has some quite nice graphics, and you've got some touch sensitive buttons along the edges of the screen, so you can hop between different functions. Now you can upgrade to a larger 9.2-inch screen. That comes as part of the Discover Pro pack, but really we wouldn't bother because this screen is absolutely fine because it comes with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring as standard. You do though have to pay extra if you want wireless smartphone mirroring rather than plugging your phone in. Another change is to this air conditioning panel down here. So if you go for a Style or an R-Line model, then you will get dual zone climate control. And that means there are these fiddly touch sensitive slider pads. They're at least backlit, so you can see them at night. That's not the case on some of VW's electric models, but they're just a bit fiddly to use while you're driving. And we would prefer normal physical knobs for adjusting the air conditioning. And thankfully, that is what you get on cheaper versions of the T-Cross. So if you go for a Life or a match trim model, then you get manual air conditioning rather than dual zone climate control. And that means you can just turn a dial to raise or lower the interior temperature and adjust the fan speed. So another reason to save your money there. The driving position is very good. You've got a nice, comfortable, supportive seat, and you do feel a little bit higher up than you do in a regular hatchback. That's not the case in a Skoda Kamiq. So this isn't a car that just looks a bit like an SUV. It does feel a little bit elevated from the driver's seat, although clearly it's not a Range Rover or something like that. Also good visibility, so these pillars are fairly upright. They don't block too much of your view because they're not too thick either. And all versions now come with a digital instrument panel behind the steering wheel. Now this version has the optional 10.25 inch screen, but you get an 8-inch screen as standard, and really we don't think it's worth paying extra for. Although if you're going for the R-Line model, which we wouldn't necessarily recommend you do, then you do get the 10.25 inch display as standard. Storage is very, very good actually. So you have a nice deep cubby under the central armrest here. There are 2 cup holders just in front of it, and there is a huge tray in front of the gear lever here that's useful for throwing things you need easy access to, like your phone or your wallet. On top of that, there are huge door pockets here. They're not partitioned, so things do tend to slide around as you accelerate or brake. But as I say, they're nice and big, and you can even fit a 2-litre bottle of water in the end there if you're feeling thirsty on a hot day like this. The glove box is a decent size too, as you can see. And on top of that, I have a tray under my seat here. So that is quite useful if you just want to keep things out, so I can put my phone there, and no one, unless they're a T-Cross expert, is going to know that that's there. In the back here, there is a pretty good amount of space for a small SUV actually. This seat in front is set up for my driving position. I'm just over 6 feet tall, and as you can see, I've got a good amount of knee room, and I've actually got loads of space for my feet under the seat here. And on top of that, there is good headroom. So even if I sit bolt upright back in my seat and use the head restraints, my head isn't quite touching the ceiling. So again, very good by class standards. And I've even got a good view out there thanks to this quite tall side room that it's squared off, so it doesn't taper towards the rear of the car like it does in, say, a VW Tygo. But I want to show you something else, because look at this. Sliding rear seats. And okay, this isn't some amazing feature that we've never seen before in an SUV, but still, you don't get these in a Skoda Kamiq, a Ford Puma, or a T-Roc. And yes, the bench slides forwards in one big hit. There's no 60-40 or 40-20 split like there is in a lot of luxury SUVs, but it does give you the added flexibility because your rear passengers can enjoy lots of legroom, like I am now, or you can slide the seats forward and free up space in the boot. And if you do that, you will find 455 litres of luggage space below the parcel shelf. So about the same as most versions of the VW T-Roc. And even if you slide these seats back again to give your rear passengers as much legroom as possible, then there's still 385 litres of space. So a little bit less than in a Skoda Kamiq or a Ford Puma. But anyway, how many of these carry-on suitcases can you fit in the boot of a T-Cross below the parcel shelf? And there you go, 5 carry-on suitcases in the T-Cross with a fair amount of space left for soft bags or anything else you want to poke down the side there. Now that's not bad at all, although it is worth noting that some cars in this class can take more. So we managed to fit 8 carry-on suitcases in the back of a Ford Puma. And you can watch our review of that car by clicking the link up there at the top. And it's a pretty practical boot in other ways too, because all versions of the T-Cross come with a height adjustable boot floor, and if you set that to its highest setting up here, you will see there is barely any lip at the entrance, or when you fold down the rear seat backs, they drop in a 60-40 split. There is no step in the floor of the extended load bay either. So overall, not a class leading boot, but not bad at all, and it's certainly very handy to have those flexible rear seats. So, as I said earlier, this particular car has the most powerful engine that you can get in the T-Cross. It's the 1.5 TSI 150, and it works really well with the 7-speed dual clutch automatic gearbox that you get as standard. In a larger, more expensive car like the Tiguan, for example, then we have been a little critical of this engine because it sounds slightly coarse and it's a little bit noisy. But in a small SUV like this, obviously the standards are lower because you're spending less money, and compared with rivals, this engine is actually smooth and it's pretty hushed. Performance is really impressive too. So this engine pulls well from low revs, and if you wanted to, it can do 0 to 62 in 8.4 seconds. So it's around about as fast as the most powerful version of the normal Ford Puma, the 1 litre EcoBoost 155. But really the 1 litre engines are absolutely fine, even the entry-level 1 litre TSI 95. Yes, ultimately it isn't as fast. It'll do 0 to 62 in around 11 seconds, but it doesn't feel out of its depth in town, on the motorway, or even on a faster country road like the one we're on now. Ride comfort does depend on the wheel size. So this car has 18-inch alloys. They're the biggest you can get on the T-Cross, and they are optional on Style and R-Line models. And to be honest, they do make things a little bit lumpy. Go for 16 or 17-inch alloys though, and actually this is one of the more comfortable small SUVs out there. It's certainly more supple than a Puma. That is one of the sportier cars in this class. Even if it's not quite as smooth, quite as plush as a T-Roc, that car offers class-leading ride comfort, particularly on its smaller alloy wheel options. The T-Roc is a bit quieter than this car as well. Again, the 18-inch alloys probably don't help because they drop a little bit more road noise, but even on other versions of the T-Cross, you can hear the suspension working away under the car. So it isn't the quietest small SUV, but overall, by class standards compared with the Puma, then it's fairly hushed. And actually the brakes are really well judged. So you can gauge very easily just how hard you need to squeeze your right foot to slow down smoothly when you approach a junction, like the one we're coming up to now. Now, handling. This isn't quite as agile as a Ford Puma, but you know what? It stays pretty flat through the corners, it grips well, the steering is direct, it gives you a good sense of connection with the front wheels, and it feels in tune with the car's responses. So overall, by small SUV standards, this is a pretty good car to drive. So there are 3 questions that need answering. Firstly, should you buy a T-Cross, or would you actually be better off with one of VW's other small SUVs? Well, the T-Roc is definitely the best of the 3. It is the best to drive, it's the most comfortable, and really, apart from those sliding rear seats, it's just as practical as the T-Cross. In fact, it has a slightly bigger boot, but it does cost more money. So the T-Roc starts at more than £28,500, whereas you can have one of these for less than 24k. So the answer is, if you're prepared to spend closer to 30k, buy a T-Roc. If you want to keep things cheap, then go for the entry-level 1 litre TSI 95 version of this car. The Taigo is the one that's a little bit harder to make a case for because although it's a very good car in isolation, it's more expensive than the T-Cross and it isn't as good to drive as the T-Roc. So really, the only reason to choose one of those is because you like the way it looks. Now, question number 2. We already know that the cheapest versions of the T-Cross make the most sense, but would you actually be better off with something like a Skoda Kamiq? Well, perhaps surprisingly, that's actually a bit more expensive than the T-Cross, and it has a noticeably lower driving position, so it doesn't feel very SUV-like from behind the wheel. And the Ford Puma, well, the starting price of that is higher again. So yes, if you're looking for a well-priced, practical SUV that now has a pretty smart interior, the T-Cross is a great choice and a better buy than it's ever been. And the final question, which trim level should you go for? We already know the entry-level 1 litre TSI 95 engine is the most recommendable, but actually we would advise steering clear of the entry-level trim. It's called Life, and although it gets you a reasonable amount of standard equipment, for only an extra £175 you can upgrade to Match trim. That'll get you useful extras like a reversing camera, keyless entry, and you get bigger 17-inch alloys as well. You get 16s on the base car. Steer clear of the higher trims though. They are called Style, which is what this car is, and R-Line, because they push the price of the T-Cross into the territory of altogether better small SUVs. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you want to watch another review, click there. And to find out lots more information about the T-Cross, head over to our detailed written review at whatcar.com by clicking there.